One of the things I absolutely love about the modern day left is their complete and utter lack of self-awareness or connection to reality. And one of the best examples of a leftist or a group of leftists without any connection to reality and absolutely no self-awareness is the Young Turks. And a picture-perfect example of this, pun intended, you'll see why a little bit later, is the Young Turks' coverage of Trump supposedly hiring a fake business owner in order to do a photo op in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Now, this story has actually made the rounds across the leftist online media and even in the mainstream media about Trump supposedly doing this. And the best headline of all actually doesn't come from the Young Turks. It comes from the David Pakman show, where he calls this guy a crisis actor that Trump hired. Trump hired a crisis actor in order to pose as a store owner, according to David Pakman and most of the people on the far left. But before we get into why this is a ridiculous narrative, which I will be destroying later on in this video, I do want to get into the start of this video because it's about that lack of self-awareness that I happen to have mentioned in the beginning of this video.
Donald Trump has latched onto divisive propaganda regarding civil unrest in the country, and he's using this as a campaign strategy. There's no question about it. Some of his disinformation honestly reminds me of the type of stuff you would hear from North Korea or any dictatorial regime that uses this type of disinformation to further divide and conquer. And one of the more recent examples was from Trump's visit to Kenosha yesterday, Kenosha, Wisconsin. He purported to be speaking to a shop owner who lost his store, I believe it was a camera store, because of the unrest, because of the so-called looters and the violence in Kenosha,
This is so wonderful. Within about a 45-second time period, Anna Kasparian accused Donald Trump of being like a North Korean propagandist, while at the same time calling the looting and rioting that is happening, that we're seeing videos of, that Trump is literally pictured in front of a building that was looted and then destroyed in riots, so-called looting and rioting.
Because of the so-called looters and the violence in Kenosha.
Which one of you is supposed to be doing North Korean style propaganda, Anna? I mean, already, within 45 seconds of this video, under the first minute, we have an embarrassing, obvious lie that is an attempt at propaganda in order to lie to the audience and convince them that what's actually happening and is real, visible, and tangible and has been on all of our screens across the internet for over 90 days is so-called and somehow call that into question. Absolutely ridiculous. On top of that, she compared Trump to Kim Jong-un. Anna is a socialist. The Young Turks are backing a socialist candidate. They back Bernie Sanders. Kim Jong-un is a communist. He came to power with the same divisive rhetoric about class warfare and about how the rich getting richer somehow means the poor getting poorer, even though the exact opposite is true. So Anna, calling Trump North Korean propaganda, is actively doing North Korean style propaganda, and she's actually aligned ideologically with the same people that put the North Korean dictatorship into power, the socialists and communists.
Tom Graham, who actually owns this old camera shop, that was leveled in fires last Monday after protests broke out in Wisconsin.
Leveled when protests broke out. This is one of my favorite parts of the story. I like it even better than Anna's opening without any self-awareness, where she compared Trump to North Korea as she's doing North Korean style propaganda. Because in order to cover this story, in order to make this into an orange man bad, Anna actually has to communicate that the store in question was in fact destroyed, but she already said that the rioting and looting wasn't happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Don't believe your lying eyes. So she has to say, and you can hear it in her voice when she says the word leveled, with trepidation.
That was leveled in fires last Monday after protests broke out in Wisconsin.
That it was leveled when protests broke out in Kenosha, Wisconsin. You know those tricky protests, always super peaceful, especially the most peaceful of the peaceful protests that just happen to level buildings that house expensive camera equipment that was taken out of the building before the building was leveled. Totally not looting and rioting, I assure you, and Anna can back me up on this. This store was leveled during protests of peace. The leveling of this store was due to the weight of the peace from the peaceful protest just being on top of this store and sharing in solidarity of that peace.
It appears that a former owner of the shop, John Rhodey III, who lavishly praised the president's efforts, was featured instead. Graham told the local NBC affiliate that he has been the shop owner of the century-old Roadies camera shop for the past 8 years after he purchased the shop from the Roadie family.
So it was at this point of the video when I realized that I was going to be watching something special, because the Young Turks think they got such a solid gotcha on Orange Man. They think that this is an Orange Man bad story to the maximum, because this guy sold the store 8 years ago to the current owner, and the current owner did not want to appear out there with Trump. But did you notice that this guy's last name is Roadie, and the store is called Roadie's Camera Shop? As in, maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe this guy has some deeper connection to the store that goes beyond his current status as owner. Because that struck me personally as a little bit odd. I mean, remember, David Pacman and other people on the left are talking about how this guy was hired as a crisis actor to stand in front of this store. So it's a really good job by Trump's campaign crisis actor team to find a guy who shares a namesake with the store. Except that's not what happened at all. It turns out that Roadie, the guy that they're interviewing, is the descendant from the first person who started this store. Roadie's Camera Shop has been in business for 109 years until the Kenosha riots. And for 101 years, that was a family business until this Roadie finally ended up selling the store. Now, if you had something in your family that was in your family for multiple generations, over a century, 101 years, the same amount of years as Dalmatians in that Disney movie, when you see that store get burned down by rioters in a city, do you think that you might have a bit of an emotional response? Do you think that if the president called you to talk about this store that was built by your family, regardless of whether you ended up selling it or not within the last decade, you would actually go out and talk about the thing that your family built, a legacy that lived on even past your family's ownership of that store? I would definitely be out there. I don't have anything near that in my family that goes back that many generations that I can call my own. I don't have the oldest of anything in my city, but Roadie and that store was the oldest camera store in the city, and again, it is still named for him. So regardless of whether or not this guy is the real owner right now at this very moment, the point is, and the reason that they brought him out there, is because the store was started by his family and owned for over a century by his family. So it makes perfect sense that this guy would have an emotional attachment to that store. But it gets worse when you go further into the Young Turks video.
The store was here 109 years, just about the oldest in the nation, doing what you did.
In the state, for sure.
It's fantastic. And we're going to help them a lot. I think we're going to help them a lot. Would you like to say something?
I just appreciate President Trump coming today. Everybody here does. We're so thankful that we got the federal troops in to help, because once they got here, things did calm down quite a bit. And our city police and sheriff and fire departments are awesome. They work harder than you can believe, 24/7.
That's true. These gentlemen did a fantastic job. Working with the federal government, and it was really great. And once we said, let's go, that was the end of it. Unfortunately, they had a few days when people wouldn't call us. They didn't want to have us come in. They just don't want us to come in, and then destruction is done. A day early, we would have saved your store.
Absolutely.
1 day early.
1 day early.
I just want to remind everyone that the federal government does not have the ability to just send in federal troops or federal officials in response to any type of unrest. The state needs to ask for it, right? So a common misrepresentation that you'll likely hear is that, oh, the federal government took actions into their own hands and they wanted to help provide safety in these failing democratic states. Like, that's the narrative we keep hearing, but just understand how that system really works and how Trump literally does not have the ability to do that. So
this is so unbelievably dumb that it defies logic. If you listen very carefully to what Donald Trump actually said and Anna Kasparian's response to it, she is quite literally just repeating, a little bit of paraphrasing here and there, exactly what Donald Trump said, and then using that as a point to attack him. She's saying, as Trump said, that the federal government does not have the power to send in the federal troops without the governor's permission. And Trump is saying that he wanted to the day that this store was ended up being destroyed, which is also the same day as the Kenosha shooting, which is an indisputable fact. Remember, earlier in the same day as the Rittenhouse shooting, the governor of Wisconsin publicly refused Trump's offer to give National Guard troops to the state of Wisconsin, and we saw the results of that. So you have Anna very dumbly trying to get a one-up on Donald Trump, talking about how Trump is lying, supposedly, by saying that he has no power to send the troops into those states, when Anna's confirming that he has no power to send the troops into those states, and that the troops weren't sent into those states. That means they must have been refused by somebody at the local level, and the local level of all the relevant jurisdictions that could have refused this request, the governor and the mayor of Kenosha, were all Democrats. So Anna's like, Trump is trying to make up that these failing Democratic governors let their cities burn, but I'm also telling you that's exactly what happened. Orange man bad. Orange man bad. John, help, John. Now look, the rest of this video, unfortunately, is nowhere near as funny as this first half. The Young Turks thinking it's some kind of gotcha that they couldn't get the guy who currently owned this store to talk to Trump about the store. They could only get the guy whose family owned this business for 101 years. What a bunch of losers, am I right? But what's really funny is that they end up showing the destruction of the store. They end up showing their audience with the language that they use to describe the rioting as protests somehow breaking out and magically leveling this store. And they basically reinforce the fact that these people are looting, they are destroying this area, and the Young Turks and all of the left-wing media are incredibly disingenuous when they tell you that it's not happening. But there is one more policy reach that the Young Turks try to go for in here that I don't want to leave unaddressed. And that's this idea that Trump really doesn't care about the rioting. He really doesn't care about law and order because he won't sign a stimulus package with extra funding for the states.
I mean, look, one of the best examples of how Trump actually doesn't care about providing aid to these businesses and to these communities that he alleges have been absolutely devastated by these protesters is the fact that he has said that he'll veto any type of stimulus legislation that includes funding for state and local government.
Two things on this point. One, I think should be perfectly obvious and should have gone without saying, but again, the Young Turks, so we can't talk about anything that should go without saying when we're dealing with people as informed and intellectually honest as them. If you are a mayor or a governor, or anybody for that matter, that is in a position of power to defend property from rioting with the police, and you decide to pull your police back and give into the riotings, allow the destruction to happen, and on top of that, you refuse federal troops' help in stopping the destruction, you should receive no aid to rebuild from that destruction. You were derelict in your duty, and you shouldn't be able to pass that on to other people in the country who were not derelict in their duty. But number two, and this is most important and most crucial, the reason that President Trump doesn't want to sign into law any stimulus bill that has funds going to the states is not because he doesn't want to aid the states with either the pandemic or even the riots. The reason he doesn't want to do that is because a lot of states like New York, California, and major Democratic centers are trying to get the federal government to bail them out of their pensions that were already underwater pre-crisis, pre-pandemic. So you have opportunistic states, cities, local municipalities, mostly run by Democrats, trying to use a federal government bailout under the guise of helping them with a pandemic in order to cover the cost of pension promises that they never should have made. These deals would have been insolvent whether or not we had a pandemic, economic crisis, or we didn't. These were bad deals from the jump. And they're trying to pass that on to the federal government as if it is somehow related to the pandemic when all these problems predated the pandemic. So absolutely not. If your state, city, local municipality was responsible in their pension guarantees to their public employees, you should not have to pay more in taxes to cover cities like my city or my state or California that were irresponsible in the guarantees that they made to their public sector union workers. So nice job, TYT. You managed to lie about this story from top to bottom, and you inadvertently showed the looting and rioting that you were denying while calling it peaceful protests. Nobody should trust you. You've been incredibly dishonest, and honestly, it's embarrassing that YouTube has sided with your channel and uses you guys to promote their platform. Absolutely horrific. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, if you like the video, you know what to do. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on my social media accounts. You can support me via the support links. They're all linked in the description. Till next time.